really happy that DHH opened for us and gave us a perfect story to tell you, how we left Kansas and got to Portland. So, I'm Andrew. As you can see, I like to eat giant meringue. I work for New Relic on the core team, which means I work on our UI, data collection, and all sorts of other cool things.
And I'm Julian. I work in the New Relic San Francisco office. I primarily work on internal tools and other fun things like that. You might remember me from the landing page of New Relic, or from the billboard of New Relic, or maybe from the photo of me standing in front of the billboard.
And as we said, we work at New Relic. So today, the key point we want you to get is that it is totally possible to boot Rails 2 and Rails 3. And this is the way you should go about upgrading to Rails 3.
Yeah, so we wanted a single code base that could run Rails 2 and Rails 3 at the same time. Our point of view is, why build out a feature branch if it's going to be out of date at the end of the day that it was created? Now, we're really talking about continuous integration, about getting things on production as early as possible, working on master, working with other people.
And most importantly, New Relic has a lot of engineers. There were 55 people working on the core app, as we call it. But there were just 2 of us working on the upgrade. So you can totally try this at home. And you should, because it's better for the whole Rails community if we finally get rid of Rails 2.3.
All right, so first off, at New Relic, we love numbers. So quick show of hands. Who here is upgraded to Rails 3 already? Okay, that's good. Good solid wow. Are you guys here? So at New Relic, we asked ourselves the same question. We wanted to see how many of our customers had upgraded to Rails 3. So we pulled up the stats. Here you can see the number of accounts and the Rails version. So as you can see here, everyone has upgraded to Rails 3.2 already. That's fantastic. Best talk ever, everyone can go home. Now we found the upgrade quite hard, and so we didn't quite believe these numbers. So we asked ourselves a slightly different question. We asked, what does it look like when people are running on more than one server? So essentially, if you're running a business, if you're running a larger app, what version of Rails are you running? And we found here that it was massively skewed back towards Rails 2.3. As you can see here, a couple of people have jumped to 3.0.5, but by and large, everyone is before that 3 hurdle already. By the way, people on 3.0.5, there are a few security updates you guys might want to pay attention to. Might be worth upgrading. So one of the things that's expecting to see here was, and this is a chart of the Rails version that people are running, and the number of servers that they're running. And the thing that I was expecting to see out of this was, I was expecting to see people that were running these really large apps stuck on very old versions of Rails. But that isn't what we were able to take out of this. The real takeaway here was, whatever version of Rails you installed was pretty tightly coupled with what you were currently running. It was very hard for people to migrate away. So, quick show of hands from the people that haven't upgraded to Rails 3. What are some of the reasons you guys haven't upgraded yet?
Shout out.
Time. Yeah. Time, resources, that sort of stuff. Upgrade? Sorry? Risk. Yeah, that's right. So, upgrading is hard. There's a huge amount of risk. And at the end of the day, you're not engineers working by yourselves. You're working for a business. You're working as part of a company. Why does a company need to take on that risk? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So we approached the Rails 3 upgrade in a pretty standard way. Step 1, procrastinate. We sat on this for about 2 years. Now, as we're saying, upgrading is hard. There's a lot of risk involved. It's definitely a hard process. And you need to convince the business, why is it worthwhile? You know, if they're not convinced that it's a priority to upgrade, then it's never going to get the buy-in.
To be fair, during those 2 years, we were doing other things. We were behind the Ruby 1.9 upgrade. And this we could totally justify to the business. Ruby 1.9, it is faster. And at New Relic, we know that means money. So we were totally into this upgrade. But still, it took us a long time to do it. We put it off. We thought, maybe we can rewrite parts of our app, split it up, break those pieces out, and then move them individually into 1.9. We never actually did that. We thought about doing it all at once. It turns out that it's not that easy to just say, okay, I'm going to take this day or maybe a couple days and our app is suddenly going to work in 1.9 when you have a big app. When we tried having a long-running branch, that didn't end up working out for us. What we did do is we did do it on master and it worked really well. But Rails 3 was a little bit of a different story. At first we were talking about, well, Rails 3 looks really, really cool. The new active record syntax, the new internals, it looks like it would be a great win for us. if we were writing a new app. But we have an existing app. It works. Our customers use it. So why should we upgrade it? Didn't make a ton of sense to us right then. Eventually, we realized that we should probably upgrade. But reading everybody else, we knew it was not going to be easy. So we figured it would get easier soon. It's in Rails core's interest to make it possible for people to get off of 2.3. And that didn't really happen. So then we realized it was just going to suck. Now let's talk a little bit about why we actually made that decision to upgrade. We use a lot of dependencies in New Relic. Some of them are just for little libraries that we need, whatever. Those we could see, okay, the new versions of Rails 3 are not only. Okay, we'd probably be okay with that, and maybe we'd have to backwards some security updates. We can deal with it. But then we started to see real productivity boosting tools that would have a huge impact on us, like Zeus. If we could, say, preload our Rails app and then run tests in half a second, or rate tasks, whatever, that would be awesome for all of us. And we watched the video, we were really excited to download it, just, gem install Zeus, that's it, right? No, you need Rails 3. Another major problem was hiring. So, hey Julian, New Relic's really cool, we have a lot of fun working in a great office, you should come work on a Rails 2.3 app.
Sure, what?
That kind of thing. And this is now a little bit in hindsight, but we missed a bunch of security problems by getting off of 2.3. But even before we upgraded, we would see some CVEs get announced, some patches released, and we'd see a new gem for 3.1, a new gem for 3.2, maybe a Git revision for 3.0, and sometimes there would be nothing for 2.3. And we were really, really worried. So,
yeah, so I mean, all of these things kind of came in and gave us a very compelling business reason to move away from Rails 2. Essentially what it amounted to was it was more expensive for us to stay on Rails 2 than it was for us to move away. So we had a goal. Our goal was to upgrade to Rails 3. Now, before we get into this, I want to give you a little bit of history about New Relic. Now, New Relic was originally a Rails 1.2.3 app. It's 6 years old. So what this means is there's a lot of history there. Now, over the course of that 6-year period, as you can see, we've got 40,000 commits, 7,000 files changed, and just over 500,000 lines of code added. So it's pretty huge. And this was done by over 120 commits over that 6-year span. So we upgraded to Rails 2 just before 2008, and we did the upgrade to Rails 3. We finished that off just at the start of this year. So that took us a 2-month window, and you can see that the commit history is massively different between those periods of time, quite a lot of change. So over that 2-month window, we were talking about 2,000 commits that happened from the entire developer team. We're all working together on the same master code base. There were 55 developers working. It was just under 3,000 files modified, 110,000 lines of code added, and 25,000 lines of code removed, just in a 2-month window. So we're talking about a very dynamic, very active environment that we are trying to upgrade at the same time. So a quick snapshot. Just before we started, we were running Rails 2.3.14. There were 70,000 application lines of code and 60,000 test lines of code. So what does this all mean? It means don't break the world. You're working with a lot of other people that you have to depend on. You can't bring down production. There are 35,000 customers that we have at New Relic that are relying on us for their uptime data, for their metrics. If we go down, that's catastrophic for them. They're going to be incredibly angry. You've got all of these other developers. We're all working together. So if I make a commit and on Monday morning they come in and they can't work, that's a huge productivity loss to 55 other people, 53 other people. There were lots of long-running projects in flight as well. We couldn't ask everyone to stop what they're doing and just help with the framework upgrade.
Not only could we not ask them to stop, we couldn't really make their lives more difficult. So we work with a lot of people, and if we had to say, okay, as part of your normal workflow, you're doing, you have a little bit more friction, that's maybe going to cause them to miss some deadlines. It's going to get them in trouble. It's not going to make them happy if we work with them every day. So we couldn't do that to them. And we couldn't do that to ourselves. We couldn't add the friction of, say, dealing with massive merge conflicts all the time. Because if you're dealing with a framework upgrade, you're not just touching an isolated segment of code if your app's old enough. You're dealing with lines of code all over the place that depend on Rails internals. So we basically, we really didn't want to deal with a feature branch, but we felt we had no choice. So feature branch it is.
So we kicked things off with a Rails 3 feature branch. We split that off. We didn't really know how else to approach this. First thing we did is that we used the Rails upgrade plugin, which is provided by Rails core. Now, you throw this down in vendor plugins, it gives you a whole list of great tasks that help you upgrade. One of the things it does is it modifies all of your config files. So this gave us a really good idea of what was about to be clocked. And eventually we ended up getting Rails 3 to boot this way. Now, as part of this upgrade process, we spent a lot of time in Bundler as well. I assume everyone here is familiar with Bundler. Those of you that aren't, Bundler is a way of keeping track of your third-party libraries. So we're working in the gem file, and we're finding all of the old libraries, and we're trying to update them. And we came across this platforms directive that was left over from when we did the Ruby 1.9 upgrade. And as you can see here, it essentially says, if you're using Ruby 1.9, use library X. If you're using Ruby 1.8, use library Y. And we're looking at this, and we're like, wouldn't it be amazing if we could do this with a Rails upgrade? If we could say, hey, if you're running Rails 2, use these Rails 2 libraries. And if you're running Rails 3, use these other Rails 3 libraries. So we thought about this, and we were wondering if it was possible. Now, if anyone's modified their gem file, you'll realize that it generates a gem file.log. And what this file does is it keeps track of all the third-party libraries that we use. So for example, if I add awesome print, because I wanted to use it locally in my development machine, it means that Andrew also gets it. And it also means that it ends up in production, and there's not much you can do about it. Now, the gem file is a Ruby file, so you could say if Julian's machine use awesome print. Unfortunately, that means that the gem file lock that I generate is different to the gem file lock that Andrew generates, and you get these conflicts. And we didn't want anything like that happening with this Rails 3 idea. So we looked at Bundler, we spent a bit of time, a little bit of forethought, and we hit it with a great walking monkey bunch.
So, as Julian said, gem file is just a Ruby file. So, first off, don't bother trying to read this. It's terrible, it's ugly. We'll have something better for you at the end. What you can do is, if you want a monkey patch bundler, you can't really say, okay, well, we're going to require a gem that does it, because by the time you've done that, bundler's already been invoked. So a good place to put it is at the top of your gem file. So we put this patch in where, if we wanted to, defined by if we're going to use Rails 3, then we can change the location of the lock file. And what that allowed us to do was have 2 lock files. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, so this meant that we had 2 different completely isolated repositories, one for all of our Rails 2 libraries and one for all of our Rails 3 libraries. And we realized that this meant that we could start loading which environment we wanted on demand. We had this realization that we now had the opportunity to feature lock our framework and do incremental rollouts.
So an example of what the gem file using that looked like. We said if is Rails 3, and if it's Rails 3, we've already put that monkey patch into place. We use one set of gems, otherwise we use a different one. And what you're not seeing here is that this is a pretty short portion of the gem file. There are a whole ton of gems that we depend on that work in both Rails 3 and Rails 2. So if another developer, one of those other 55 people, needed to come in and modify something, update something, they probably didn't have to mess with this section, and it would just work for them. And it worked really well. You just had to say, you know what, we're going to set an environment variable, use Rails 3, and then after that bundler, it works. Rails server, it works.
Yeah, so as I said before, we really got this opportunity to feature lock our framework. And this gave us a huge amount of insight. We could now do incremental rollouts. It's meant that we're going from this stock standard upgrade path where you're doing these feature branches. You can now modify that, and the way that you approach it is different. So all of a sudden, our goals are able to change. And we can make this, we can approach this in a way that it's accessible for everyone. We were able to create these files where we could say, hey, if you want to start doing development in Rails 3, all you need to do is Ruby script Rails 3, and it worked for you. We're able to really roll this out one step at a time to developers' boxes as they wanted through testing and production. So the next step for us was getting it onto master. So I'd like to go into a little bit of detail about what those previous steps that we came across have actually meant. So getting it onto master, getting Rails 3 to boot, the dual boot process, and so on and so forth. So the first thing that we had was we had Rails 2 working. Rails 3 didn't exist. The next step for us was to do that feature branch and install the Rails 3 upgrade gem. They gave us Rails 3 that booted, didn't work, but it completely hosed Rails 2. So this is the stage that we realized that we could use Bundler to get both Rails 2 and Rails 3 booting, neither of them running. And at this moment we realized, hang on, if we start focusing on Rails 2, we can actually merge into master. So we spent some time, we got Rails 2 booting and running, Rails 3 booting, not running. And we realized, this is it, the test's passed, we can push this upstream. And that was it. we merged it upstream, we got it onto master. And in turn, the next day, this is on production. Now what this actually meant was, our production environment is still running Rails 2, all the developers are still working in Rails 2, but all of these config files, everything that you need to boot Rails 3 was there and present, it just wasn't interacting and interrupting developers.
So let's talk a little about what we had to do to actually get that Rails 3 app to work. This was a long, hard process. But the first thing we had to do was get the config files happy. So in Rails 2, you have two main config files in the boot sequence. You have boot and environment. Boot just requires Rails. Environment loads, configures, and initializes your app. Rails 3 is different. You have one more file, application, and all three files have different responsibilities. Boot has to require bundler, not Rails. Environment just initializes the app. And application is what actually does the loading and configuring. So we just needed to make it work. Now, what you're about to see here is kind of ugly. It's not what's in the Relic's codebase anymore because we got rid of it. But we were able to get the boot file, for example, to work. We say, if you're in Rails 3, do exactly what Rails 3 expects. You load bundler, ta-da. Otherwise, you load Rails and you boot it. That's just copy-paste from the stock files. The environment file is almost a stock Rails 3 environment file. We require the application file, and then if we're in Rails 3, we initialize it. Pretty simple, but what this means is that the application file now has to be doing the work that Rails 2 expects of the environment file, which is loading, configuring, and initializing the app. So let's take a look at how we did that. First off, the application file, we put a new module in there just to organize the code, which has three methods: Rails 3 config, Rails 2 config, and common config. Most of our configuration we were able to put in the common config method, but a few names changed, different defaults. We needed to put some extra stuff in Rails 3 config and Rails 2 config. But this meant that most of it was in one place, and all we needed to do was get the config objects passed into the appropriate methods. So at the bottom of that file, we said, okay, if we're in Rails 3, we're going to create an application as normal, and we're going to grab that config object from inside that class and pass it to the Rails 3 config method. Otherwise, we're going to grab the initializer and pass a block to it, which in turn grabs the config object and passes that to Rails 2 config. This is all pretty ugly, but again, it works.
I mean, the big advantage here was we have a surprisingly active application and environment files. It meant that there was only one place for people to go. Like, everything was stored together. There weren't separate files or anything like that. So that was really incredible that we weren't having these merge conflicts or collisions or anything like that. So it's really important that you have tests that you can trust. You don't need to have 100% test coverage, but you do need to have pretty good coverage. It doesn't matter if you approach the Rails upgrade as like this dual boot that we did, which was kind of a little different, or in the standard upgrade path. You need to have these tests. Otherwise, you won't know what's broken. Now, we rely very heavily on continuous integration. Now, this is more than just testing. It's more than having Jenkins, but this is definitely part of it. So we use Jenkins. Now, we had this dual boot approach to Rails, to the Rails 3 upgrade. Now, what this meant for us was we had a job running for Rails 2 tests. We were able to create a new one for the Rails 3 tests. So every time any developer committed to master, the tests got run in both environments. We could tell if they were helping or hurting. Now, solving these tests, it's the hard yards. Again, it doesn't matter how you're approaching the upgrade. It takes a huge amount of time to whittle down your tests one by one and get them all passed. But at least this way, we're able to see actively in the bigger ecosystem of all the other developers what is going on and how, like, what the kind of code that they're committing and how is it helping out to work.
So over that process, you're probably going to find that you're going to need to upgrade some dependencies. In a lot of cases, what you may want to do is just say, okay, there's a new version of a gem, it works in Rails 3, I'm going to stick that in the appropriate section of the gem file. But every time you do that, what you're doing is you're saying, when we flip that switch in production that shifts us over to Rails 3, that's a whole other bundle of code that's shifting along with it. And it's, if possible, you want to avoid that, because what we were trying to do was minimize risk. So it's even better if you can update those dependencies on master, on Rails 2 as well as in Rails 3. So that's one less thing that changes when you actually deploy. A good example of that for us was Backgroundjob to Resque. Does anybody here use Backgroundjob?
There's a guy over there.
We weren't alone. Did any of you use it in 2008? Yeah, so we were using it up until the end of last year, and we finally got off of it onto Resque. This is a normal BJ submit. You pass out a script you want to run, pass it an email, it does its thing. It works, but it caused us a bunch of problems. In our 1.9 upgrade, we had to patch it to make it just work at all. And in addition, we had some issues with load pads and things when we actually rolled out to production. we wanted to remove this as something from our concerns. So we took that BJ submit clause. We said, you know what, you're not talking to BJ anymore, you're talking to async command. And now async command just internally talks to BJ, that's it. Really simple, except when we swapped out the backend to say, okay, if you want to use Resque, async command is now going to enqueue itself with Resque, and then use a little shim to just fork out and run a job, which is what BJ does. Otherwise, it's going to talk to BJ. We tested this out for a long time, worked pretty well. Boom, Resque, done. So what we've done here is both in the case of the BJ Resque upgrade and in this full Rails 3 upgrade process, is we've branched by abstraction. So feature branching can be a bit of a pain because the moment you cut your branch, you're out of date. Every time you change something, you are, when you could finally get around to that merge, you got to take a look at what you're actually changing in that release. And the diff isn't really that helpful necessarily because it doesn't provide the context that you as a human need. But branching by abstraction lets you make those changes on mainline, and it's really obvious where you're actually branching. You have an if statement, or you have a different implementation that you're swapping out. It works really well.
Okay, so punt when you can. Now what we mean by this is we're upgrading to Rails 3. You don't need to do everything all at once. Now the big thing for us was deprecation rules. They're fantastic. But they're telling us what won't work in Rails 3.1. We're just getting a 2.3 up to Rails 3.1. So we wanted to silence that pretty quickly. The next thing, your routes. They still work. Now we have a huge routes file. We thought this was going to be a really daunting task to go and upgrade all of these things. It just wasn't a problem. It just works. You don't need to deal with it at this moment. Action mailer, same story. All of your mailers still work. It's a big win. It just takes it off the plate.
Your models mostly will still work. You might have some cases where you're depending on Rails internals and you have to maybe if-def something out. We did. But there are also some feature changes. Single table inheritance is implemented a little differently, where the class is stored fully qualified in Rails 3. It's a better idea, so you should leave that as the default. But you probably have a whole bunch of models that use the old way. Just turn it off for those particular models. Again, with your views, probably still work, but a little bit of a feature change. Helpers are now not just, oh, well, each controller has a corresponding helper, and if you want to include more, you can. It's everything's included by default. And if you have a big app, you might have some namespace collisions. That might not necessarily work just off the bat, so you can just clear those helpers, get rid of them. And if you're like us, we're using the prototype helper, you might have to throw that back in. Finally, error handling. So in Rails 2, error handling is just in the controller. There's, I think, a middleware to catch some things, but it's all the logic is in the controller. Rails 3, more logic has been moved out into a middleware. And so with the kind of error handling we were trying to do and render context-specific error pages wasn't going to work. So we had to just monkey patch the existing system in Rails 3 to work like it did in Rails 2. Again, this was kind of ugly, but it's temporarily ugly. All of these things are going to disappear when you finally remove support for Rails 2. I wouldn't normally recommend adding a whole bunch of if statements to your code that branch based on the environment. But as long as you're planning on making that upgrade and then removing support, it's totally fine, and it's probably the better way to do things.
It's totally the lesser of two evils. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about rolling this out. Now, as we said, we were dual booting Rails 2 and Rails 3, so we had this real opportunity to roll it out one environment at a time, one developer at a time, like whatever we wanted. It was fantastic. So first thing we did is we sent out an email to all of our developers, and we said, hey guys, we're about a week away from turning this live on production. We want you to start doing development in Rails 3. And we had a massive uptake of pretty much no one. That's fine. The next step, we spun up a staging server, and it was full. So this staging server was running Rails 3. The other staging server was running Rails 2. Every commit that happened, it got a deployment to the Rails 2 server as well as the Rails 3 server. We ended up spending about a week of very extensive manual testing, full regression testing. It took us quite a huge amount of time, the two of us plus a few QA people. We found a ton of HTML safeguards. It's all of the things that your tests don't catch, so it's really important you do spend the time doing this. So next up, make everyone a tester. So we told you how we had two different staging environments. We just flipped them all over into Rails 3. So whenever someone wrote code and they deployed it, they were looking at the Rails 3 version. And this was a couple days before we rolled it out into production. So we were getting the real sense of what people were actively contributing. Was it going to fly in a few days' time?
And finally, right before we deployed, we said, congratulations everybody, and good morning, you're all running Rails 3. If you need to test something that's in production, all you need to do is use Rails 3. Rails 2 equals true, you're going to get back to Rails 2. Otherwise, Rails server, and you're ready to go. That's it. So with that, we fixed a bunch of issues, and we thought we were almost ready to go. And then we remembered our Ruby 1.9 rollout. So I said earlier that 1.9 was easy to make the case in the business for because it was going to be a performance win. And that's what we thought. So we rolled it out, and our servers immediately just fell over. So we had to roll back ASAP. Turned out it was a problem on our end. When we actually got it fixed and 1.9 went out, it was a performance win. But we didn't want a repeat of that. Well, we deployed something that we thought would occur, and just everything fell to pieces. So we wanted to do a side-by-side load test. And then we noticed this. Rails 2 and Rails 3 sessions are completely incompatible. They use marshalling to store their data, and they refer to specific classes, not just simple data structures. So the flash hash changed from being an action controller to action dispatch, and suddenly your sessions are broken. I think that was a pretty poor decision, but it meant that we were suddenly not going to be able to do that load test because people who would bounce from Rails 2 to Rails 3 would just get an error. It wouldn't even clear their session, it just would blow up. But then Envato came to the rescue. They had this lovely gem, Rails 4 session flash backport. And you might be wondering, why is there a 4 in there? I thought we were talking about Rails 3. Rails 4 does a sensible thing. It stores the flash as an actual hash. So it deserializes fine, even if they make changes in the future. And what this does is it patches it to go back to Rails 2 and Rails 3 and work the same way, and adds a little bit of support for deserializing the old versions into a hash. It worked, we were really happy, and so we rolled out a canary. Load testing, not a problem, but we weren't worried. We saw a slight spike in the error rate, but we thought that this was probably some other transient thing that we didn't realize about bouncing back and forth between Rails 2 and Rails 3, because we just couldn't reproduce it at all. So we said, you know what, ship it.
Totally. And so this was the first time that we actually had a tangible impact on all the other developers. We paused the wheel. We said, hey guys, we're turning on Rails 3 in production today. We're confident things are going to go well, but we want a little bit of runway. Let's not have any other developments go on, any other deployments go out. So traditionally we're deploying once, sometimes up to 5 times a day. This day, that was our Rails 3 day. And this was the only time that we asked everyone, let Rails 3 have its moment.
So we rolled it out, and whoops, no problems. Worked really well. Might have been a slight increase in the app server time, but from the end user's perspective, no big deal. We were really, really happy. Except we then noticed, oops.
Yeah, that little error.
Oh, what error?
The transient error from the canary.
Oh yeah, that?
Yeah, it wasn't transient. So, New Relic offers error monitoring. What this means is we're able to see all the errors that happen, we're able to see where they happen. You can attach custom params to it. So we were attaching params such as the customer's email address. So we're watching this error, and we're going to the pages that it's being generated on, and we just couldn't reproduce it. And we see that it happened on an internal page. We look up the email address, we see it's one of our sales staff. As soon as this error happened, we jump on HipChat and we contact this guy. We're like, Marcus, you just caused an error. And he's like, wow, the support's amazing. Like, how did you do it? And he tells us he's running Firefox 9. Now, to put things in perspective, at the time, Firefox 18 was the standard. a little out of date. But as soon as we found that out, we're able to reproduce it. We're able to get the stack trace from New Relic. We're able to see what the problem was. The problem ended up being content type was not being set by default on old browsers for jQuery, so any XHR requests weren't quite working how we expected. But we solved it, wasn't a problem. Yeah.
And with that, we were done. Totally done. We played some board games that night, except we were not done. There may or may not have been a few very, very tiny fires. And seriously, they were tiny fires. We rolled out Rails 3. 99% of things continued to work. So let's talk about those fires a little bit.
So the first thing that broke for us was our audit track. Now that sounds really dramatic, but it wasn't anywhere near as big as what it sounds. We use Access Audible to keep track of changes to users, subscriptions, that sort of stuff. Now what it does is it keeps track of what changed and who changed it. And part of this Rails 3 upgrade, we lost track of who changed it. And this was because there was a change in the sweeper pattern between Rails 2 and Rails 3. Now the real underlying problem here was that we were using an outdated gem that was built for Rails 2, and we assumed it was going to work in Rails 3. There is a Rails 3 version, it's called Audited, but there was a schema change, so we weren't interested in actually doing that. And it seemed like it worked during our dry runs. We didn't really pay too much attention to it. Now, the big takeaway here is that we were relying on a third-party gem to test itself. We weren't testing it, we weren't paying it too much attention, and we just assumed everything worked. Now we found this, we fixed it, it wasn't a really big problem, but it was definitely a surprise for the first couple hours. So there's a lot of unexpected things that can go out like that.
Stepping back a little further, this was before the Rails 3 rollout, but was definitely a little bit of a fire for one person. We rolled out Resque all at once, and so it set off a couple alarms and woke up one of our on-call engineers at 3 a.m. He understandably was not too happy about that, but you know, got him a donut, things were all better. So another thing we had to deal with was ActiveScaffold. We had to spend a couple times punching it in the face. The JavaScript on ActiveScaffold 3 was not implemented the same way. It was using jQuery instead of prototype, which was great, but we had to wire things up for UJS properly, and we didn't really test that thoroughly, so that was a problem. Bigger problem was that it has a lovely feature where it doesn't expect you to source control its own JavaScript files. So every boot up, it removes stuff from its directory in public, writes out its assets, and then in ActiveScaffold 3 only, opens one of those up and tries to append some stuff to it for localization. That is a race condition. If you have 30 processes moving at once, you can easily have one process write those files out, another one come online and remove them, and then the other one try to open that non-existent file up. That explodes. And this happened over and over and over again for us.
So another thing that we had was, as part of this Resque rollout, we lost Backgroundjob instrumentation. At Relic, we provide instrumentation, which means that you're able to see where time is being spent, how much money, memory is being allocated, what your application is doing. Now, this is more a side effect of rushing things out, not really paying too much attention to the finer details. We found it, we resolved it, it wasn't really a problem. But still, it's a portion we pay.
This last one really could have been a big deal, and we are very, very thankful it wasn't. So as we said, we practice continuous integration, which means we use a test server, and we use the results of that test server to determine what we're going to deploy the next day. We were determining what was green, what was ready to be deployed to production, based on whether it had passed the Rails 2 tests, for a couple days after we rolled out Rails 3. It easily could have blown up if somebody had added something that didn't work in Rails 3, we wouldn't have known. And finally, we had to spend a lot of time cleaning things up. I spent the next few weeks removing 30,000 lines of code. Now, a lot of that is a vendor ActiveScaffold, but we had all of those if statements all over the place, and then we had to enable those deprecation warnings, and that took a while to clean up.
So, what are the lessons learned here? What are the big takeaways? Number one, pre-order the donuts of your on-call engineer. Now, what we mean by this is, you're working in an environment with a whole bunch of other people. Be very cognizant that the changes that you make have an upstream effect. Sometimes they can be positive, sometimes they can be negative. Just be aware that you're working with other people. Two, deprecate ActiveScaffold. Now, what we mean by this is, just because it works doesn't mean that it's going to work. So, you don't want to deal with upgrading your third-party libraries as part of your framework upgrade. Upgrade libraries as you can, and if you're no longer using them, if you don't have a business need for them, get rid of them altogether. And schedule lots of time for firefighting and cleanup. Now, just because you've deployed Rails 3 into production doesn't mean that you're done. It took us 3 weeks to do all the cleanup updates. So, right here, this is the takeaway that we want. Get everything into master as early as possible, and be incremental. It's incredibly powerful that you can roll things out and test them. Continuous integration is your best friend. It's more than just testing. It's being able to get it onto master, get it into production. It's the entire environment.
And with that, we're done. And if you liked hearing about what we talked about, want to work on cool problems like these, Relic's always hiring. At the top right, we have a link for you, and you can use that as some template files to make this kind of Rails 3 upgrade possible.
And we're also throwing a party tomorrow night. I hope everyone can RSVP and attend that. There are little cards floating around with the URL. Anyone have any questions? We've got a couple minutes.